And continuing from yesterday's video, we have the top 10 worst competitive starter Pokemon. So one interesting thing that happened is that when we go into the comments section, it's that if you don't see an anticipated Pokemon or your favorite Pokemon top 10 best, it's going to be in the top 10 worst. And one of the most popular ones was Infernape. Where's the Fire Monkey? Infernape, Ellipses, and then we also have Infernape now on the list. Can't wait for the reason. Well, that's going to be in today's video. Also, this one right here, what about Empoleon? Great coverage, gets defog, immune to poison, it's great in UU. Well, first off, Smogon is garbage, so tiers have no relevance to any discussion whatsoever. And then also, it does not get an exclusive defog, because we talk about defog in 6th generation, we're talking about Blue Pentagon Legal, and it doesn't get that. I double checked, and also a lot of Pokemon actually get defog, which takes away the relevance of Empoleon getting it. Let's just go to the list. Number 10 is going to be Blastoise. So here's where it gets kind of funny. Blastoise is both in the top 10 best and the top 10 worst because there's only 19. You saw Pikachu on the thumbnail. Pikachu's going to be somewhere on this list. But yeah, Blastoise is going to be there now. Here's the thing, we already talked about it. It's a sturdy Pokemon. It's got tankiness to back it up. But when you look at its hit ability, Rain setup for just 1/16 of its max hit points isn't too much. You'd rather put a Swift Swim Pokemon in and sweep with something else. And also, when we look at like other moves, Aqua Jet, it just does, or Aqua Ring, it just does not get the sustain that it needs. Say if you take half of your health and damage trying to set up the Aqua Ring, well, you're almost never going to get that back by staying around 8 more turns. Even taking a quarter of your health is like throwing away that Aqua Ring setup. So it's really just like a Protect Toxic Staller. It's at like the bottom of Toxic Stalling. There's way better Pokemon that are more filthy at it, but Blastoise is still tanky, it can still put out some setup, and it can still be a very frustrating Pokemon to deal with from time to time. Mega Blastoise is what you want, because Mega Blastoise is just going to match up against anything neutrally and destroy it. We talked about it in the last video. Let's go on to number 9, because this is what everyone wants to see. Infernape. So it's kind of like that clutch decision between where is Infernape going to go. Now, it was always number 11, like throughout many iterations of this list, trying to put it higher, trying to put it lower, and I think that this is a very fair place for the Infernape. It gets the Iron Fist ability, and then we can look at its basic coverage. Thunder Punch, Flare Blitz, Close Combat, and then Fake Out or Overheat. When we look at the Fake Out, it's going to be nice utility in singles or doubles, and Fake Out into extra damage, just free right there. That works out pretty well. But also we do get the Overheat, which means we're running mixed. But then we look at our stats and we're just a lesser Greninja. That we're so frail, we either have to run the Focus Sash to try to survive something, because with a 108 base speed, a lot more Pokemon threaten us. That with Greninja, if something outspeeds it, that's going to be rough. But by the time you're getting in that high of a speed tier, those Pokemon either don't have a lot of damage or they just don't really exist. So with Infernape, there's a lot of Pokemon that like 110, 115 speed, outspeed it, absolutely trash it, and it does have the fire fighting typing, so there are a ton of weaknesses. Infernape's main plus is that it can't be burned, so it can't be stalled out and then weakened through its power like that. So it will find some relevance by just not having its attack being cut. At the same time, it's going to find situations where Flare Blitz isn't enough, Close Combat isn't enough, it has to run a speedy nature, so it's going to be losing out on damage that way. And if you are running a naive nature to get that Overheat in, well, that means you have to put a little bit of special attack investment, we're doing less damage, and you get gated super hard. Pretty much what I'm saying is there's never been a time where I've seen Infernape and gone, oh crap, this is really going to be, like, this is really going to suck. No, there are times where it has threatened me, there are times where it has that, but every Pokemon's done that at some point. But I don't see Infernape and immediately get as scared as I do of other Pokemon I see on this list. So let's go into number 8 on this list, Feraligatr. Feraligatr's weird, because look at this. It gets Dragon Dance. It also gets Life Orb, and then you go Life Orb Sheer Force. So the crazy thing about this is like you're not taking the loss of 1/10 of your max hit points if comboed with Sheer Force when using a move that works. So our coverage is Waterfall, Ice Punch, and then we go into the Crunch. Here's like why it doesn't make any sense. 105 attack, so we can max it out. We go Jolly Nature, and then after we use our 1 Dragon Dance, we have 420 base speed. So we just blaze down all the opponents as a water type, and that's it. It seems like the Dragon Dance +1 to Waterfall Stab, double Sheer Force, Life Orb craziness would be enough to knock out almost anything, and yet we still don't see Feraligatr all the time. It's also bulky enough compared to Gyarados. Gyarados is slightly tankier, runs almost the exact same set, and I guess that's the problem. Gyarados has higher attack, it has more speed, it has more tankiness. Now, the Life Orb Sheer Force damage will definitely offset the advantages that Gyarados has there, except for the tankiness, and I just don't understand why people aren't running Feraligatr then. Either it's a super sleeper OP Pokemon, or that it's really not that great and we see a Gyarados every time instead of when we're seeing a Feraligatr. someone needs to prove me wrong. I was hoping that at some point with these hidden abilities that Feraligatr will like catapult into like easily top 10, maybe like 7th, 8th place for starter Pokemon, but that just didn't happen, so I guess it's because Feraligatr is truly underwhelming. Now for number 7 on this list, I am going to put the Delphox. Delphox is, I would expect it to be higher on the list as well. I expect it to be a stronger Pokemon. 104 base speed. Once you're outspeeding those 100 base speed Pokemon, you're going to be in a pretty decent position, but at the same time, 72, 75. If we're getting hit by a neutral or just a really common earthquake, like all the fire type Pokemon do find those issues where they have to struggle with just eating an overwhelming hit and not being able to dish enough damage back in enough amount of time, and that could be very problematic. But at the same time, Delphox has great anti-stall. It has the Mystical Fire, so if the opponent's setting up Calm Mind, you can at least like keep down their damage boosting while you try to find another way around it. And also you do get Calm Mind for yourself, so it can actually do some really cool Calm Mind shenanigans, and it has good special attack and speed. You outspeed your opponent, Calm Mind, tank up the hit, and then it feels like you should have the damage, but even then, Delphox does and doesn't. Like Life Orb into a Fire Blast is pretty solid, and there is one really cool combo that you can use on a Delphox that is pretty nice. So if we go Power Herb into a Solar Beam, and then we run, I know this is like where it starts getting crazy. Power Herb Solar Beam into the Magician ability means that we're going to be able to steal the opponent's item while doing a very high base power move on the first turn. And that's kind of it. Like, Delphox has a cool gimmick like that. You steal the item, you might be able to use that to gain some power, and then you can tag on the Dazzling Gleam for some extra coverage. Yeah, that works out pretty well, but also, we do want to get in a Psychic type attack if we want to, and here we have Psyshock if we want to hit physically, or Psychic if we want to compound on the damage. It just kind of gets split up. Alright, Delphox has 114 special attack, but that's not really too much higher than anything else on this list. 114, still pretty low. So 359 compared to Infernape's, that say Infernape has some kind of boosted nature or something. Its highest is going to be at 337. So very small point difference, not even 10% extra damage just from having a higher special attack compared to the other starters, and it's going to drop off to where Delphox needs to find 2-hit KOs. It doesn't do ridiculous like snowballing stuff, doesn't have super high amounts of base damage from the start, so it's going to be pretty low on the list. Next up we have Empoleon. Empoleon pulling in that 6th place. It's another weird Pokemon. Like, I've seen it succeed. There have been times where I'm like, why can't I get over this Empoleon? Because it is very tanky. You can see it run the Assault Vest, and it has some awkward coverage, but in like a cool way. That it'll run Scald, and then you can also go Scald into Flash Cannon, so it can actually deal with a good amount of Pokemon. I mean, you get a Scald Burn while you're Assault Vested, and then the opponent's going to have a very difficult time. Also, Grass Knot to round out your coverage, and can even run the knockoff. So it's like, alright, I'm removing your item, I'm going to burn you down, and then we can just find other coverage things that make it pretty difficult for you. Now, the Defiant ability, I've seen like a Swords Dance Defiant set, and that actually did like massive damage, but it is kind of risky, kind of unreliable, and it is its own like niche level of play, but it still works out pretty well. The special attack, hit point investment, try to tank up with an Assault Vest, maybe sprinkle in a little bit of defense just in case you don't get the Scald Burn, and then you just run down as an attacker and hope for the best. That's really all it's going to do. Like, it can be annoying, it can be frustrating, but it's not going to carry these games. It's not going to absolutely trash your opponent every time. It's going to be a fun Pokemon to use, and that's why it's not in the bottom 5, which is what we're going to be dealing with right now. And that's where I'm going to drop in the Chestnut. So Chestnut just has way too many weaknesses to make it work. Now, it does have a really awesome ability in Bulletproof that moves just won't work against it for no reason, like Shadow Ball, Sludge Bomb, Seed Bomb. These moves just will not affect Chestnut. And it's a very powerful ability, but Chestnut doesn't really get to do too much with it because of all of its weaknesses. Also, it's very low speed. Pretty much how you play Chestnut. You bring it in, you get outsped, you get hit by a super effective hit, and then you go down. But it does have a lot of potential power that as a defensive tank or even an Assault Vest Pokemon, it can come in and make that work. And it also does get like some little nifty things it can do. It can like Power Punch into some really nice coverage. Drain Punch, Earthquake. We also have like Seed Bomb if we want to go for that coverage. So I mean, yeah, there we go. Seed Bomb, Drain Punch, Earthquake. Now we have good coverage. Power Punch once, start healing off of the Drain Punch, and in those situations where your opponent isn't hitting you super effective, you can keep pace with them very well. Now, you can also tech in a Spiky Shield if you want to do it, but that's more of a doubles, very safe kind of thing that you can play. But yeah, this is going to give you tankiness, it's going to give you durability. We still don't see the Chestnut though, even though on paper this set makes a lot of sense. I don't know why we don't see it. It's just not that fantastic, because I mean, alright, we max out the attack, we max out the hit points. Yeah, it seems like it should work, but then you get burned, things can go wrong really quickly with Chestnut, so it's not reliable enough to really mean much of anything. Now let's keep adding on to this list, and number 5 is where we're putting Pikachu slash Raichu. I mean, Raichu is the fully evolved form of Pikachu, so that's where, like, why aren't we talking about, like, the other first stage evolutions with it? So Raichu is going to give us a good amount of speed and some really interesting stuff. So Raichu has a fast fake out. 1 out of 10 base speed fake out does work in doubles, and it also still has a fairly strong volt tackle. It can do some other nifty things like knock off, or even play around with like a nasty plot and then suddenly gain a good amount of special attack and you have to worry about Thunderbolt doing things. Mostly a doubles Pokemon because it also has the follow me. Okay, so Raichu gets the tank up like for the team with a little bit of support, so it's like fake out, follow me. The Pokemon next to you is going to be able to do whatever it wants, and since you have a 110 base speed Pokemon right here, if you're outspeeding what your opponent is trying to set up, you can also make some cool things happen as well. You knock off their item, and you really get momentum in your favor, but at the same time, Raichu, those stats are fairly average. Like 90 attack isn't going to win you battles, it isn't going to do massive amounts of damage, but you do have the follow-up damage right there, and even then, if you're not using it for the Volt Tackle, you do have the Nuzzle, so it's a very high utility Pokemon. Very high amounts of utility, very solid amounts of damage and follow through. Also can Encore, so it'll frustrate your opponent. It'll frustrate the opponent in doubles. Doesn't really get too much else done in singles since it's just an easy Pokemon to wall against. Like, alright, bring in a physical defensive tank, just bring in a ground Pokemon, bring in something to tank up against. Unless it's like a nasty plot in a Grass Knot set, it's going to be very easy to deal with, so it's going to be low on the list. And here we go, guys. What do we put for number 3? I think we already know who the worst Pokemon is. When we're coming into number 3, I'm going to throw down the Samurott. So I was looking at, well, that's not Samurott. I was looking at Samurott, I was thinking, man, if only it got a good hit ability. And it gets Shell Armor as a Pokemon that doesn't get any boosting moves. So the great thing about Shell Armor cannot be struck by a critical hit. Well, if you're a Pokemon that's using something like Curse, if you're using Curse, well, we don't get Curse on the Samurott. What about Amnesia? If we're using Amnesia, then that means we don't get crit and we don't get Amnesia. We don't get Stockpile, we don't get Cosmic Power, we don't get any way of boosting our defenses, and we can't even make use of it. No Calm Mind, no nothing. So, Shell Armor is useless to us. We can run the Torrent ability, and then I was trying to figure out ways of comboing off the Torrent. Like, okay, you Lychee Berry the Torrent into a Sword Stance while you also go Aqua Jet and try to, like, pick up the damage from there in those nice situations with a 100 base attack. Still not enough. Samurott just does not find a lot of use. 100 base attack, low speed. It's going to get outsped. Its special attack conflicts with other things it wants to do damage-wise. But at the same time, it's like, okay, Hydro Pump, Ice Beam, Air Slash into like something else. We don't get a nasty plot set up either. So we don't have any way of boosting our special attack to actually make this 108 mean something. We're going to get outsped, we're going to take damage, and there's not many things we one-shot. So any other Pokemon that has water ice coverage or any water coverage is going to do better than Samurott in almost every situation. That if Samurott was going to find a KO, another Pokemon was going to find that KO anyways. So kind of put you back, and that's why we're looking at the Samurott. Life Orb going to make it even more frail. It's just, it doesn't do anything. The stats are way too all over the place. The Pokemon has no identity with what it wants to use in the power situation, and that's why it's going to be number 3 in the worst Pokemon. Number 2 is going to be Torterra. Poor Torterra. I've wanted to use this Pokemon because it's like, oh man, you give it the Stockpile, or you give it like Curse Amnesia, and it can get really tanky, and it can do a lot of really cool things right there. Curse Amnesia also has the Synthesis, so it's a tanky Pokemon that can set up, get beefy, get all those stats behind it, use Synthesis to stay safe, also has like Earthquake or Energy Ball coverage, and then it's just going to get hit by an Ice type attack and die regardless. Also, fair amount of weaknesses, not like the worst to deal with, but it's too slow, and it doesn't really turn around and do too much. Tankiness, pretty decent, not the best, like good defensive tank, but at the same time, it's like, alright, am I going to want to bring a Torterra as a physical tank, or am I just going to cut my losses, bring in Hippowdon, bring in Skarmory, bring in another tanky Pokemon that's going to be easier to use and a lot more reliable? I think that's just the problem with Torterra. It has a lot behind it, it just doesn't set up as fast as it needs to. It doesn't snowball the game like you feel like it should, and it's going to fall super far behind because of it. Now it's time for the worst Pokemon, Meganium. I've seen like 2 competitive Meganiums ever, and they really don't do too much. We have Leaf Guard, Sunny Day is active. So if Sunny Day is active, you can't get status. That's not a good ability at all. We really screwed on the ability. Torterra, the Shell Armor was really nice on the Torterra. Like, we have Shell Armor, so that means we're not going to get crit through our Curse and our Amnesia, and yet the setup just still isn't there, and can't figure it out. But with Meganium, yeah, Meganium has Leaf Guard, and then it doesn't do anything. Like, it doesn't have, like, crazy damage options. It's very, very tanky as well. Like, it has the 100 defense, 100 special defense. But if we're talking about tankiness, well, then that means that Bayleaf is actually going to be a better Pokemon than Meganium. That we Eviolite on these tankiness, that's pretty good. And we also do have Synthesis, so it's like Toxic Stall until Leech Seed Stall, and then we try to, like, gain over the opponent. We can also, like, set up light screens and reflex and stuff. But at the same time, like, no one pulls out the Meganium. No one pulls out the Bayleaf. It has that potential, but it just doesn't happen. I guess, like, there's so many better Pokemon to choose over the Bayleaf. There's so many times where it just does not work the way that it should, and no one runs it ever. Either it's absolutely forgotten and it's a little bit of a better tank than people give it credit for, or it's just not good at all. So if you guys enjoyed the video, top 10 worst starter Pokemon, I hope you all have a nice day. Thank you for watching.